Okay, so on today's agenda, we're going to be covering Project 4 and Project 4 only. The answer for P3 will probably be covered next recitation, simply because I need, hopefully, as much time as I can get in order to explain this for you guys. Okay, so P3 will come later, and then we'll be going over essentially how to get 80% of the way there with the homework. All right, so Project 4 is a combination of everything that you covered in previous programming assignments. So everything that you did in P, essentially 1, 2, and 3. P0 is just minor stuff you will be using in P4. So P2 was you just basically just had to build an API with a global variable, just referencing some stuff like users. You have your user array, and then you create like a very basic front end to interact with that API. And you also learn how to use Postman, which you can use in this assignment as well, but it's not necessary. And then P3 takes P2, but then adds a layer of complexity to it, which involves actually interacting with an external database instead of having stuff in a global variable. This is the same thing where you create an API which basically just maintains or keeps track of a certain score in MongoDB, and then you have routes that the front end can use to interact with that to keep track of the score and to collect the score as well. And then on your front end, you'll be interacting with another API, which is one that you don't make, but it's called the Deck of Cards API. It's already built for you. Everything is hosted on their end. All you have to do is essentially implement all of the routes in your front end such that you can start playing the game. And we are going to be creating blackjack. So there are multiple components to this. I'll start with one at a time, and hopefully, as I sort of establish a baseline structure, we can move forward with, getting most of the way there with completing the assignment. So if you don't know how blackjack works, you can play some online for free. Basically, the premise is you're going to be implementing some of the core functionalities of this game. You don't have to do any of the money stuff, right? But how it works is you get 2 cards, whereas the dealer also gets 2 cards. You see both of yours, but you only see one of theirs. Okay. The goal is to get as close to 21 as possible, which is the total sum of your cards. But if you go above 21, then you lose, right? So I'm at 20, right? If I ask for another card, it will almost definitely be above 21. So the safe, bet would be to press stand, and that means I give up my turn, and I lose the round because the dealer lucked out. So those are the essential mechanics. If I want to ask for another card, then I press hit, and then that basically brings my result to 21. But if I go above that, then I lose. So you are basically going to be doing very similar thing to this. The rules are defined over here, and in addition to that, there is a nuance with some of the values. So if you ever get an ace, like here, I get blackjack because I get 21 from the get-go. But ace has a value of 11 unless your total value is above 21. If it's above that, then the value of ace goes back to 1 to try to keep you in that safe area. And that rule only applies to ace. So it's just one edge case that you have to consider when you're implementing your thing. So, yep.
If you get an ace on your first 2 and you're like, okay, that doesn't, the value, does it change if you get another one? Can you say that after the fact?
Yeah, and I was confused about this as well, but you can definitely there's a nice core explanation that basically details the definition of the value of an ace, and then for example it has a scenario where it's you get a card of 2, a card of an ace, a card of 3, and then another ace, and then a 9, and then the king. So on the first card that you get, which is a 2, the total is 2. On the first ace that you get a soft 13 because it's an ace, so the default value is 11, but it can change to 1 if your total is above 21. So at the moment it's not set in stone, hence it's a soft 13. After that, you get a card of 3. That would be a soft 16. And then you get another ace, but 16 plus 11 is above 21. So that ace goes down to a value of 1. So you get a soft 17, right? So at the moment, one ace is 11, and then the next ace is 1. Okay. And then when you get a 9, it would be technically like a soft 26 because 9 plus 17 is 26, but you still have one ace that has a value of 11. So what you can do is subtract 10 from that, and like that converts the value of 11 to 1 from ace, right? So it would go from a 26, which is above 21, to a 16, which is below 21. So you're still like in that safe zone. It's dynamic, but we will basically cover a way of how you can account for that in your code. I hope that answered your question. Okay. You can, well, okay, so we're going to be using MongoDB Atlas for this demonstration. If you want, you can run MongoDB locally. I'm not going to do that during this recitation. The database schema is super simple. You can design it however you want. I'll just be having two fields. Like one is the winner, which is like either a player or a dealer, and then the other one is the winning hand of cards. So like if the dealer wins and he has like an ace of spades and like a two of hearts, then I would store dealer as the winner and then ace of spades and two of hearts as the hand that won. And then our API is supposed to have two routes. One is get, one is post. Get essentially fetches the scores, right? Like the aggregate values of the entire game. And basically what you do is you request all the results and then you basically go through each one and then like, have a counter, right? And then post is when you add information to the database, and that's it. No updates, no deletes. It's just create and read. So that makes your life a little bit easier, all things considered. Moving on from that, our front end can be either in Pug or HTML. Pug is what you've been using for P1 and P2, P3. Actually, not P1, P2 and P3. It is basically just a template. That's how you got like the read, create buttons. You can also just use basic HTML. I won't be doing that in this recitation. I'll just be using Pug simply because personal preference. I haven't used it before, but it's interesting to use. So we can go with that. And it's fairly straightforward. All of your manipulation should be done in JavaScript, which is the main.js file, just like you did in P2 and P3. Yep. And then all of the deck API calls are also made in main.js, which is on the front end. So let's start with the back end real quick. First things first, there were some mistakes that weren't left out in the actual file, so it prevented that from running. All I have to do is comment like the film router because we're not using that anymore, and then we can have our like index stuff over here. So nothing too complicated. As well, in our models, we have game.js, but in our index route, we have film, which is an invalid call. So you just rename that back to game because that's what we export. And then here, what we can do is modify the schema to basically having the hand be an array of strings, which is like an array of the cards that are part of the winning set. And then you can also have a field for like the winner, for example. So this is essentially it, right? We're basically done with this file, which is good. So we need two routes. One of them is get, and one of them is post. They both have the same endpoint. They're just different types, different methods. So what the get is supposed to do is essentially, well, first things first, fetch all the results from the database. Okay, so we have game.word. Let's make this asynchronous. So we have await game.find, and then that would go into an array of documents. So here we have a very simple counter. basically counts how many times the dealer won versus the player. So like in this game, you can either have the dealer winning, the player winning, or it's a tie. If the tie, we don't do anything. If the dealer wins, then we add that result to the database, and then when we loop through all of our results, then we just increment those counters. So if I do this real quick, I'm just going to do this, where we loop through the whole thing and then increment the counters as such. And then we can just return that as a response. And that's pretty much the first API route done. Okay. For post, it's a little bit more involved, but nothing that you haven't done before. You want to isolate the body, right? So we're going to pass some fields into that. So we have a winner in the hand, and then we just want to do is create a new object with these desired values. So of course, you would do some schema checking, right? Just to make sure that the winner is either player or dealer and nothing else, and also that hand is like a valid, array of strings. I'm not going to do that here, but you definitely should in your assignment. So we do await game.create, and then that saves it, and then we just want to do pretty much anything. So that's pretty much it. So the purpose of this code right over here is the post route, creates new documents in the database, and the get route collects all those documents and then increments counters as needed, and then returns that result. So that's pretty much the API on the back end done. You can always test this in Postman, but I'll skip that part and just go right to the front end part of it. So for the front end, we have two parts, which is the JavaScript functionality as well as all of the actual documents. I want to use semantic UI, which is outlined over here. If I want to use that, then I have to add some import statements. Let's see if I can find it here. So here's a link that we can use to import that. How that will look is in your layout.bug file, you have your script which points to main.js. That's all fine and dandy, so we're just going to add two more of those. And then we're going to replace one of those links with our semantic link, right? And then we also need to install import jQuery. And that link isn't provided in the repository, but what you can do is just go to the very quick get started section, and then do not use this. This is a local import, which means that it's implying that you already have it installed on your computer. We're going through a minified JavaScript file that is hosted somewhere else. So we're just going to take that link and then import it above our semantic UI stuff. And this is very important because semantic UI uses jQuery. So if you import jQuery after semantic UI, then it's not going to work. It's going to throw an error in your console, and then you're going to be very confused. So make sure you have it in this order. And then, actually, just to be safe, I would put main.js below everything. So we have this. We're pretty much done with this. So in our index.pug file, we have our boilerplate code that we got from the repository. So if I just do node app and then go on my link, then you'll see I have some useless stuff on this web page. So we need multiple components. if you look at the repository, you need a okay. First things first. You need to do a bunch of CSS in this. Like you have like a green background, and like the cards need to be like this place, and like the other cards need to be like in that corner of the screen, and then you need a counter on like the upper right corner or whatever. I'm not gonna be doing that. I'm just gonna show you like the basic functionalities, and then you figure out all like the positionings on your own time. Okay. So we need to display a modal when the HTML page loads. That modal is a component that could be provided by Semantic UI. You can also implement it yourself, but if you already have it given to us, might as well just use it. And then we have some scoring tallies, and then we have a button in the modal which we have to add. And then once you click it, it triggers like the beginning of the game. So you make a request to the API, load your cards. The API provides images for the cards, which is nice, which means that you don't have to find them yourself. It doesn't provide the image for the back of the card, which means that you can just go on like any Google Images, right? Like back of the card, and just copy the link, and it'll work as long as that link ends with like .jpeg, like because that means it's a file. So we're gonna start with the modal first. So at the moment we have nothing, right? But if I add something that looks like this, let me just bring up my phone real quick so that I can sort of blitz through this a lot quicker. So UI.modal is a built-in component. If you want to add an ID to it, then you can use hashtag whatever. So I'm going to do this. This is the same mechanism that you can see in your previous homework assignments with the buttons. So you would have like UI.green.button, and then hashtag create, which gives the button an ID of create, which you can then reference in your JavaScript file. So that's how we're able to connect JavaScript to the actual components themselves. So we have our modal, and then some text, of course, with no CSS at the moment, like or something like that. And then underneath that, we can include a button with an ID of deal, right? Because that's like the expected text of the button. So if I just do this, hopefully this works on the first try. So we just have a quick modal, and then in not index, but in main.js, we have our onload function. So in that, I'll just put a jQuery statement. Jesus. Let's see if this works. So if we run the code, right, as soon as the page loads, which is basically like this function right here. So window onload equals a function in which we call jQuery start modal, right, which is what we define right over here, and then .modal show, and that basically causes this to like render. And because we have a div that says welcome to blackjack, and then a green button that we added like as a child in that modal, that's what displays. And then we can add like a trigger to this button over here. At the moment, does nothing, right? But that's what we're going to be working with a bit later. So in addition to this, you want multiple other modals. So one for whether you win or lose. So let's just go with win modal. Of course, I implore you to read the README very carefully because it tells you what to include in those modals, like what details, more information. I won't be following that as closely in the interest of time, so I'll just be putting some placeholders, and then we can work with that moving forward. So we have another button, and then something like this. All right, so we just have a bunch of modals. Each one has a different ID, as you can tell by the hashtag after UI modal. So even though I added a bunch of them, if I reload my page, only one of them renders. So that's what we want. Okay, so we want the welcome to blackjack modal to render first, and then we can call these later on as part of our logic. So we have all of our modals, and then we also want a placeholder for all of the dealer cards, and then also a placeholder for all of the player cards. And then in addition, we want a counter of all of the values of those cards, as well as placeholders for the counter of who wins how many games, like dealer versus player, right? So what we can do moving forward is, one sec. And you can do this however you want. I'm just going to include a couple divs with a couple of spans as children of those elements. So we have span, dealer cards, and then we can also add a class for our CSS. And then we have a dealer score as well. And what we can do is have the same thing, but instead of for dealer, it's just player. So like this. We can also add just a bunch of breaks to separate them. Of course, you would, this would look a lot nicer if you actually had some functional CSS instead of a bunch of breaks, but to each their own. And then we want two buttons, one for hit and one for like stay, okay? So this is the same code as in your P2 and P3. Add an ID to it, and then we have hit, and then just a bunch of breaks. And then the same thing for stay. So on that note, it seems like everything. If I refresh this real quick, then you can see that I have a bunch of elements in my body. All of our modals that we defined here, they're all just hidden at the moment. We have our div, which contains dealer cards and dealer score, as well as a div that contains player cards and player score, and then we have our two buttons for like controls for hitting and staying. Okay, so with that in mind, we can start implementing the logic that goes into interacting with the actual deck of cards API. But before I continue, does anyone have any questions?
Yeah. What is this? Like, why is that nonsense?
My vision's bad. I can't see from here. So I'm not gonna troubleshoot too much. So that's most likely an issue with the way you wrote index.log. So it says that something's wrong with line 2. Yeah, so you can look into that, and then if you're still having issues, then the recording will be available, and then you can sort of use that as a reference. So what about you?
It's like not recognizing the semantic UI, the modal function caller. I don't know if that's something that's wrong.
This doesn't look right. So in my layout.pug, I use the URL that is included in the README, whereas you did it like locally. So it's the same thing with like the jQuery thing that I mentioned. It has to start with HTTPS because that actually points to a URL. So give that a shot. But moving forward, no questions? Awesome. All right. So if you look at the documentation for the Deck of Cards API, it's all very convenient, right? You have the exact routes that you should call, as well as the expected response structure. And then you can draw cards from that deck. And then that gives you a response structure that looks like this. So nothing crazy. And then that's pretty much all you need. So like all these other routes you're not using. So you're just using the first two, which is nice. So the first thing we want to do is add a listener to our button that is in the modal for our initial starting modal. So we have like hashtag deal, okay? That's our ID. So what we can do is, just like with P2 and P3, right? Get element by ID, deal, dot add event listener, and then on click. We have an async function, and then what we want to do is call fetch on something that looks like this. So, and then the expected response from that is like this, but we're only really interested in deck underscore ID. So if I just extract that from the rest, equals await fetch, then we have our URL, and then then convert to JSON, and then that will give us a data object from which we just extract deck ID. So with that, I can print this to console, and then if I run this code with console opened, then you see that I print like the ID to console. So like I made the request, the API on their end have like a deck created for me, right? And then I can call routes to it by passing this ID as a parameter to my further request. So if I look at the documentation, the second request has a field or has a parameter for that specific ID. So we have this game started, but then it's like, well, where do we store all of our information? So you can do this in multiple ways. I am just going to have a global variable in the front end, which basically just keeps track of all of my current progress within the game. Let's see. Whoops. So I'll just write this out real quick, then I'll explain what I'm doing. So moving forward, we have the dealer, and we have the same thing for the player. So how this works is we have multiple counters. Current represents the actual cards that the player has. At the moment, you start with 2, but you don't know what they are, so I'm just going to have them as null. And then the convenient thing about this is we know that each player has 2 cards, but we don't know what they are. So what we can do is actually, when we're loading our images, we can have the image that is faced, like the card face down, like the back of the card load. So that way it shows that the user, like that you can't see what the card is. So we start off not knowing what any of the cards are, and then we have a score of 0. This basically just represents the sum of all of the values of the cards in current. Okay, so we'll increment and decrement this as needed. And then for soft, this is basically the edge case with aces. So we're going to have a counter with essentially basically describing how many soft aces we have. And then whenever our score goes above 21 and we have soft aces, what we can do is decrement 10 until our score is below 21. So that's how it works, and that's how we can keep track of all that and make sure everything works smoothly. So these are this is my global variable with all the counters. All right. So we have our stuff. Let's say we want to add a card to a person, right? So we have 2 people, like a dealer and a player. So I can just put this in a variable where a person would be like something that looks like this, right? And then card would be the response from our API, which would look something like this. So like each card has a code, which is what we push to current, which basically represents like it's a 2-character representation of what the card is. And then we also have value, which is 6, or in this case, and it's a string, so we have to convert it to an integer as well, to prevent like the automatic type conversion that you see in P1 or in like Quiz 1, for example. And then all the rest. Okay, so we also have the image, which we care about, and then this doesn't really matter, and we don't care about the soup either. So with this in mind, if you want to add a card to a person, the most logical thing to do is to essentially player.push card.code, right? But then it's like, okay, well, we have 2 nulls, and then if I request a card, then it's like I'll have 3 cards now, 2 of which I don't know what they are. So what we can do is, instead of pushing like just stupidly pushing a new card, what we can do is replace one of the nulls with our card. So that way we're still keeping track of our total cards, and then we expose cards as we get more of them. So what we can do, or we have not player.push, but we have player.current.push, because that's what our object is, or not player, Jesus Christ, person.current.push. Okay. So if we have person.current 0 equals to null, which is what we have over here, then we want to remove the first element, dot splice 0, 1. So you remove one element at index 0, and that removes a null, and then you end up pushing like a card instead of that null. So you have null and then an actual card object. And then you'll see where this makes sense a bit later. How much time do I have left? 40. Jesus Christ, 20 minutes. Okay. So we do this, and then we also want to increment the counter. Right? This is also the logical, or the value. This also seems pretty straightforward. However, this doesn't account for the edge case of our aces as well. Or it also doesn't count for kings, queens, and jacks, because actually, never mind, it does. But with that in mind, actually, I think the value is like a letter, like K, for kings. So we have to convert for that as well. But anyway, if we assign this to a variable, and then we have a couple of if statements. So if card.code starts with an A, that means it's an ace. Okay, so we access the first character of our string, right, which we can do just like an array. So if it equals to an A, that means it's an ace, which means that we can do score equals to 11 instead of the value that is provided by the API, because the API provides a value of A, which makes no sense for our purposes for blackjack. And then we want to increment soft by 1. Okay. If we have the same thing, but instead of ace, it's with kings, queens, and jacks, then we want the score to be 10. Okay. So with that in mind, we want to append our variable to the score of the person. But if the score is above 21 and we still have some soft aces right up our sleeve, then what we can do is decrement score, and then subtract 10 from the, or not, you can decrement soft, and then subtract 10 from the score that we're keeping track of. So we have this. And that's pretty much it. So we're not returning anything because we're modifying the actual variable in place. So we have this function that basically takes a card object, a person object, and then does all the addition as well. So we start our round, and then we want to draw our images. But at the moment, we have nothing to handle that. So let's add a function for updating our displayed cards. So if you look at our HTML, we have dealer cards and player cards. So that's what we're going to be doing here. Yep. Yeah. And then might as well just update the score while we're at it. So and with these two lines of code, we essentially reset everything that's inside of our spans. Okay, so if there are cards inside of this, then we basically just clear that out. So we're like redrawing the cards. And one thing that I should do is go to Google Images and then find a card that I can use. So this can work. Okay, so we have well, let's update the scores. So dealer score dot in HTML equals to, let's say, and this is where we start referencing our global variable with all the stuff that we want to use. So like this. So current values dot dealer dot score. Okay, so that would be the total of the current round. And then if we want to do the same thing for the player, do that like this. All right, moving on to the cards themselves. So we have current value dot dealer for each, or dot current dot dealer dot current. So for each card, we want to create an element that is an image, and then we want to set the source of the image to our URL of the image itself. So we have card element dot set attribute, and then source, comma, and then we can go back to the API documentation, and then pluck this out real quick. But instead of having the 6 of hearts every time, what we want to do is actually replace that with the code that is held in our array of codes. So like with this, for example. And then after that, we can do dealer cards dot append child and then card element. Now we can do the same thing for the player. So that's that. So we have a function that adds a card to a person. We have a function that updates our displayed values for the cards in HTML. And now we want to start basically calling the function to draw a card. So I can define this real quick. And then this should be asynchronous because we are making requests. So let's say you want to do the same thing as we did for add card, but this time we want to define how many cards we want to draw for a specific person. Because at the beginning of the game, you draw 2 cards for the player and then only 1 card for the dealer, and that's how you keep it sort of secure. Because I won't go into details of that, but we want the this to be a variable so that we can sort of configure it as a parameter in our URL. So our thing for that looks like this. Okay, so we want to replace our deck ID with our stored result. And instead of just printing it to console, in our initial start of the game, we want to set that. So current values dot equals to this. All right. All right. So when we want to fetch, what we can do is make our request to the URL. But instead of a count of 2, we want to set that to a variable. And then cards is a array of card objects, just like in this example over here. So what we're doing is this is what our response looks like when we're calling something like this, and then we're just extracting cards like that field because we don't care about anything else. And then we loop through all those results. So for each card that we want to pull for that player, we call add card and then person and then card, right? So that adds that stuff. And then after we do the whole thing, what we want to do is call our update display function that we have over here. So what this does is basically draws cards from the API, adds them to our counter values, and then we can redraw based on that information. So we have draw, update display cards, and add card. So with that in mind, at the beginning of the game, what you want to do is, let's see, is you want to start the game. So the first thing you would do is have a method for that. And then what you want to do is hide the modal that we have displayed initially. And then after that, let's see. This basically redraws our cards, and initially at the beginning of the game, this would just draw like the back of the card. So let's see if we can run this. Let's see, we have await, and then let's just call this function and see if it works. All right, so we have 2 images. And then we have image not found. That is because we're trying to access a null. That's because we're not using our back of the card that we declared earlier. So we have so this is just a conditional assignment, and I assign it to a variable, what I can do is reload this. And then when I start the game, I have very massive cards, which this is where the CSS comes in. So quickly, hopefully don't run out of time, but in our CSS, we basically defined a class of cards, which this is something else. Okay. So for our cards, we define a CSS rule where it's just we want them to be in a single line, and then we also want them to be of a specific height. So if I reload this, then that doesn't work at all. That sucks. All right, because so it's not cards as a class, it's the cards and then like all of the image components that are children to that. So if I reload this, hopefully this works, then this becomes a lot more manageable. Okay. We are running out of time. I couldn't get to the concept of actually. Well, okay, so you have the draw cards, and that's where the logic kicks in, where you start your game, you start calling the draw function for let's say await draw current values dot player, and then like actually 2 cards, and then for the dealer we want to draw 1. So if I reload this, then when I hit deal, oops, so I end up drawing 3 cards because I didn't replace this. So as you can see, with the methods that we defined, we basically, just by calling deal, we dynamically update our cards, so you don't have to do any extra code with regards to that specifically. And we draw 2 cards for the player and 1 card for the dealer. And all you have to do from there is basically compare the scores, right? If you want to hit, then what you do is, just like you did with document.get element by ID deal, you would do, instead of deal, it would be hit, and then draw current values player, and then you just want to draw 1 card at a time, and then you would but let's say like if I hit, then every time I hit it, I get a new card. Okay. If I hit stay, then I want to have the dealer essentially just keep on drawing cards until their value is above or equal to 17. So instead of stay, I would do while current values dot dealer dot score is below 17. I'll just draw 1 card for the dealer. And then if I look at this, let's say they have a score of 5, right? If I press stay, which means that I don't want to like take any more cards, then you see that it adds cards up until it reaches like 17. But then the next card is a king, so like it goes above that limit. So in this case, the dealer would lose because they have a score of above 21, and you have a score of 20. So you would add additional logic in that, which basically, like once you have that, you would make a call to your API route, just like you did in P2 and P3, like localhost/score. Post, same stuff. Like after this, you basically know how to do everything. But are there people outside of the room? Yeah, there are. So on that note, I basically ends the recitation. So more info on this next week, but I'll basically just complete what I started. Okay.